Hi everyone, welcome to the channel, and if you have recently subscribed, then welcome to the Faster 26.2. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down my personal tips and experiences running the 5 boroughs of New York City. Let's go ahead and get to it. It has been 2 weeks since running the New York City Marathon. I am still on a high. From time to time, I definitely take a look at this medal, very Olympian-esque with the full gold design, so I love that. Before we get started, again, I'd just like to ask you to go ahead and like this video, and if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button on the bottom right-hand corner of this video. That way, we'll be able to create more content and expand the community as much as we can for the next training, the next race possible. Now, in any given year, the New York City Marathon is one of the largest races in the whole world. In this particular year, major races in London, Berlin, Boston, Chicago, and New York City included had to reduce their field sizes. In an ordinary year, we probably would be expecting 54,000 plus participants. They had to pretty much limit it down to about 30,000, give or take. In order to create some kind of distancing between the waves, they've expanded the number of waves from the ordinary 3 to as many as 5 waves. And depending on which wave you were selected, you might have started 8 to 20, 40 time frame, or if it in the final wave, wave 5, then you'd be crossing the starting line just a little bit after noon, which is really late for running any particular marathon. But again, that's just to make sure to align with city, state, and I'm assuming federal guidelines as well for health and safety reasons. They had to pretty much spread the crowd as much as possible in order to keep that going. For me in particular, I was in wave 2. My expected wave time was at 9:55 a.m. So regardless of what wave you belong to, you were asked to make sure to go through any particular transportation, such as the bus, the ferry, whichever way that you were going to get to Staten Island, and make sure to get there as early as possible. So as far as the selections were concerned, I stayed at a hotel near Times Square, so I pretty much had to figure out a way to get myself through the subway line, get all the way down to the Battery, get myself to Staten Island, and find my way to the starting village. I've always found a very good way of planning these things out as far as what time I need to wake up. By working my way backwards as far as making sure what time is the start, what time do I need to be there, and then kind of work my way backwards as far as how long would transportation be required to make it to the starting village, and then add in some extra time for stretching, putting on your race gear, and of course having the very important breakfast. I left the hotel for the subway station at about 5:30 with a half-hour time frame to ride the subway all the way down to Whitehall. It was about 6 o'clock to arrive to the ferry, get in line, catch the next available ferry to cross. And so by the time that we were riding the buses and getting all the way down to Fort Wadsworth, it was approximately about 6:45 to 7 a.m. So from Times Square, pretty much I think I had to take the C line all the way down. Thankfully, I wasn't the only one. Everyone was already at the subway station. So far, it was very, very smooth from the north of Times Square all the way down to the Battery. It was pretty much about 25-minute subway ride down to the ferry station, which is at Whitehall. Catch a couple escalators, and then once you get to the platform for Staten Island Ferry, that's where everyone was pretty much funneled in to the room waiting for those 10-minute intervals from when you could be able to board. Not everyone rode the ferry. Depending on your accommodations and where you were located, you might have had personal transportation, you might have had the bus, or also you might have been on the New Jersey side and you were able to catch transportation from there. So I really wanted to catch the ferry to catch the sunrise overlooking the New York skyline of Manhattan, seeing the Statue of Liberty, and pretty much crossing the Hudson all the way down to Staten Island. So I really wanted to have the experience of just knowing what it felt like to just kind of look at everything, pretty much just have a small quiet time as you were kind of riding on the way down one leg at a time towards the starting line. So once I was able to cross the ferry, I, amongst many hundreds of people, arrived at Staten Island, It's still approximately about a mile and a half to the starting village at Fort Wadsworth. So thankfully the New York Roadrunners organization, if you were going to be arriving at the Staten Island Ferry, then you'd be boarding one of the many charter buses that was going to be able to transport you to Fort Wadsworth. I've heard some nightmare stories from those who have ridden the bus for the Boston Marathon, that some buses were lost on the way to the start line, but thankfully I didn't hear anything about that when it comes to here. Not very difficult to get yourself lost, especially when it's only about a mile and a half to Fort Wadsworth. So thankfully, as for myself and reaching out to other runners out there, I didn't hear anything get out of the ordinary. You had to go through first leg of security, and even though I don't have footage of this, I was stopped immediately because I had my GoPro and my selfie stick. The GoPro itself is not a prohibited item, but they had to take a look at the selfie stick. And so after much discussion, my GoPro and selfie stick are attached to the wrist through a little band. It does not have any opportunity of falling off whatsoever. And after talking to about 3 officers plus their supervisor, they decided it was approved. They were allowing to let me proceed, so that was great, and I greatly appreciate it, because then I can't imagine worst case scenario having to discard my stick, which I would be more than happy to do so, but then having to take the GoPro and pretty much just hold it up whenever I need to take footage, and I can just only imagine how much discomfort and potential pain there would be in having in each of my shoulders having to do that. So I was very appreciative of being forthcoming, very communicative with me, and just making sure to have the trust of runner to runner, not to be able to impede on anybody if I was going to be extending the stick out and not hurting anyone along the way. That is pretty much the time that I was expecting, knowing that it was still going to be about 2 hours to go until we'd be corralled up. Temperature wise that morning, it was 42, 43 degrees that morning. It didn't feel so bad from Manhattan, but then once you get yourself all the way to Staten Island and you're closer to the coast, you felt it. And there's no way of me being able to show through video of how much you'd be able to feel it, but my goodness, it honestly felt with the wind chill, this probably was in the mid to high 30s. Thankfully, I was able to have 2 layers of clothing for the tops. I was asked by a couple of people if I was feeling cold in my legs, and to be honest with you, it all depends on the person, but as far as for me, I don't really feel cold when it comes to waist down. It's really more of extremities, fingertips, things like that. So as far as waist up, I definitely had to go with my race singlet plus 2 shirt layers over. By walking around the starting village, I definitely saw that they were giving out bottled water. They had Dunkin' Donuts coffee, bagels, and Dunkin' Donuts being one of the sponsors for the race, they were handing out beanies, which by overhearing other runners who have done New York City before, this wasn't the first time, so they were definitely handing out beanies in prior years, and they were definitely doing the same thing this year with the 50th anniversary logo on it. So I didn't know about this, still didn't want to overlook or forego this opportunity to have some like free gear to bring home, whether it would be for myself or for my daughter. So I decided to take it with me, knowing that I'm not going to be wearing this for the entire 26 miles because it would just be way too hot. So I took it anyway, wore it to stay warm, put it in one of my little compartments, and then just kind of drag it through with me over the course of the race. For me, I was in Wave 2, Corral B. So it was pretty much towards the front, which I appreciate because I was planning to go for a sub 350 marathon. Knowing that that's pretty ambitious considering that I had done already a marathon 4 weeks prior and pretty much hitting a new PR at that time. So once beyond the corrals and we were asked to go ahead and proceed and make our way onto our designated areas on the Verrazano Bridge, there were 2 waves based on your color that you'd be able to ride on the top half of the bridge. And so for me, since I was in the green wave, I would be on the bottom half of the bridge. Now at the starting line, what I was really excited for, since I had been a longtime viewer of the New York City Marathon, is hearing the Howitzer Cannon and then hearing, of course, New York, New York by Frank Sinatra. And I'm a big Sinatra fan, so when it comes to hearing the Howitzer Cannon and then just hearing New York, New York, I've watched the New York City Marathon on YouTube, on TV so many times that I have never once envisioned myself running this race. And then having that as a personal experience, it it was absolutely out of this world. I'm still in disbelief that I was even there. So once you cross the starting line, you have now 2 miles ahead of you before you begin the next leg of the race. 1 mile up the bridge, 1 mile down. Over the years, I've heard of stories such as the beware of the showers if you're running the underside of the bridge. And in case you didn't know about this, there have been stories, it's almost like a long legend of the race, where be aware that if you're running the underside of the bridge, then you might be hit with urine from runners who are running on the top side of the bridge. And to be honest, completely false, completely untrue. Physically, it would be very impossible. You would have to have dozens of runners all needing to relieve themselves simultaneously and somehow be able to trickle down and hit you. So honestly, I knew physics-wise it was not going to work, and to be honest with you, it didn't. It was nothing. Honestly, I'm just going to leave it at that and say there was absolutely nothing to be afraid of. So especially if you have the green wave in a future race, you will not need to worry whatsoever. Running the underside of the bridge, it was great, regardless of how the weather might shape up. You have the shade. It's a little bit cooler, but you still have a great view of the skyline if you run on the direct left-hand side of the bridge, so you can be able to see the skyline and pretty much see the entire race ahead of you. Again, as a runner from Florida, there are no hills whatsoever that will be able to help prepare me for rising the bridges of the Verrazano Narrows Bridge or Queensboro. And so that being said, I knew I had to slow myself down, and I may have to do so 30 seconds slower, maybe potentially a minute slower. And based on memory, I think I crossed that approximately about at a 9:30-ish pace. So it was definitely about 40 seconds slower going up the hill, just kind of making sure I ease myself in. And the big thing you have to keep in mind is, okay, well, please hold yourself back in going downhill. And I decided to just kind of lean forward and let gravity take its course. And I think I let gravity do too much of the work, because by the time that I end up crossing mile 2, I think I had pulled potentially an 8-minute mile or a 7:50 pace. I pretty much undid my first mile slowdown, which is not what you want to do. You kind of want to ease yourself in there. So that was a mistake on my part, and it was very early on, so I definitely knew that I was probably going to be in some trouble for that. But after mile 2, you are officially in Brooklyn. And right from the start, you had people that jumped fences and were already on the side of the highway system. They were on the top of the bridges. They were already cheering you on. So that way, by the time that you get into the various neighborhoods, you already had your crowd support. In my opinion, Brooklyn was the one that brought the party. They brought the energy. They put the expectation up here for the rest of the boroughs after to keep it up. It was awesome going through all the different villages. Everyone brought their cowbells, their clackers, their flags, anything they can do to make noise and feel their presence known that you are there, that it's been 2 years since this New York City Marathon has occurred, that they were so excited for this to happen. It was awesome. I want to take as much footage as possible of seeing everyone there. And then towards the middle to end of Brooklyn, I don't know if this was on purpose, but the spectators made their way onto the road itself to kind of narrow and bottleneck the runners. And so I didn't really have too much of an issue, because thankfully the runners around me were pretty much all going at a very uniform pace. Man, it was out of this world when it comes to the amount of noise that would muffle, and it just felt as though you were at a concert. And so I wanted to take advantage of this. With my understanding of the course, mile 8 was pretty much where all 3 waves finally converge and become one herd. And I don't know if maybe because I lost myself in all the energy of what was going on, but I really felt as though all the waves kind of came together a lot sooner, like maybe at mile 5 or mile 6. So if anyone who's at the New York City Marathon, Let me know if you've kind of felt the same way too, or maybe it's just because I was just kind of like out of myself. So just let me know. Thankfully, there's certain stage points that you already have a good idea of when you're gonna be approaching the next borough. So thankfully, most of these boroughs were all separated by bridges. So the next bridge we were coming across to was essentially at the halfway point, 13.1, that you'd be crossing Pulaski Bridge into the next borough, that is Queens. This one had personal sentiment to me because my dad grew up in Queens, and even though that the course didn't go directly through the neighborhood and where my dad grew up, but still just having to know like that's where like my grandparents were, my dad had grown up. I mean, there was definitely a lot of personal connection there. So it was really great having to still see the crowd still keep up the energy. In Queens particularly, that's where you had a little bit more rolling hills. They were pretty much getting you ready for the next gigantic bridge to come. And I totally forgot that. So I decided to keep up my 8:30 pace. So I was still knocking out 25, 26, 5K splits. Not very good pacing whatsoever. I should be having this really slowed down and then working my way up, but I was just having fun and just letting my energy go with the flow. So by the time that we got into mile 15, 16, which is where the Queensboro Bridge was, no lie, the sound deteriorates, the sound just completely goes away. So you have all this noise, all this hoopla going around, and then as soon as you get onto the Queensboro Bridge, for essentially that mile and a half, nothing. You would just hear the footsteps of other runners. It was just very eerie in a way. It allowed you to kind of collect yourself because at that point I was definitely starting to like huff and puff a little bit more, starting to get to me. But then once you get over the crest of the bridge, you start to slowly hear this thundering sound. Getting yourself down the bridge, this humming sound slowly starting to get a little bit louder, get a little bit larger. Once you wrap yourself out of the Queensboro Bridge, you are officially in your first leg of Manhattan, going straight up hilly in any way, at least for, again, I'm going based on memory here. It was pretty much a very soft, undulating hill. I mean, I don't want to say flat, but it was pretty much, there's something you can kind of like control yourself with. With my personal experiences with running and racing and my level or lack thereof when it comes to strength training, once I approached 17 and 18, which is pretty much the end of the first leg of Manhattan, my hamstrings, my right hamstring in particular, just gave up. It pulled. It was almost eerie in the sense of it was pretty much the same mile mark as it was in Newport from the previous marathon 4 weeks prior. So it was just something that I had to kind of like relive this experience all over. I didn't care, honestly. It was just something that I wanted to just enjoy the rest of this race. At this point, my leg was hurting, and so I just wanted to just keep my head up. It is what it is. So once I was able to collect myself, I already knew that PRing was pretty much out of the cards for me at that point, but I really just didn't really care. I was in New York City. I was enjoying the opportunity to run in a city like that. And then once we crossed the fourth bridge that would take us into the Bronx, I really kind of wanted to feel a little bit more energy from Bronx, just because again the way the course is constructed, I think it was really more like half a mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile that is dedicated to the borough of the Bronx. So before you know it, it was just crossing one bridge, getting into the Bronx, seeing the fire department that represents that area, and then you take a couple of turns, and then you're on the final bridge, getting right back into Manhattan all over again. When it comes to like the amount of distance that is dedicated to the boroughs, the Bronx, of course, Staten Island gets a little bit of a slight from that, but Manhattan, Queens, and Brooklyn are definitely the ones that you need to go see. They definitely have about 7 miles each, and thankfully those bridges are very, very flat, not as daunting as Queensboro or Verrazano. And then once I was able to get into Manhattan, yet again for the second time, for the final time, as you are slowly getting closer and closer to Central Park, crowds were going to be there, but you start seeing all the camaraderie of the different nationalities. All you see all these different flags. It's like it's finally that culmination where everyone finally unifies and comes together, saying that you've just you just made it to this race and you've ran all this way. So even though you have the mile markers telling you that you have still about a mile and a half to go, it's just the scenery of seeing Central Park. It just makes you feel as though you're almost done. Thankfully, my wife, she was able to track me down on the New York City Marathon app and do the live tracking and all that. And so she was able to track me and see how I was progressing through them. That the app is able to predict that based on your prior splits, they're able to predict your speed and then pretty much kind of like move your dot along the course. So that way, by the time that you reach the next time mat, which I'm assuming would be every mile or every 5K split, then they would update and then reallocate your progress along the course. So I think that was pretty cool, especially when my wife was showing me afterwards. And so the final 800 meters, you have finally crossed Columbus Circle. You're finally getting past the big statue. So once you finally turn back into Central Park for the final time, you start seeing the mile markers telling you have like 800 meters, 400 meters, 200 meters. And so you know that it's coming up because with all the prior New York City marathons you might have seen on TV or on YouTube, you start seeing all the different flags of the countries represented by the participants. I think I heard my name out there, even though I don't have my name on my bib or on my singlet whatsoever. So I'm like, all right, I'm hearing my name. Let's go in and ring it in. And with about 200 meters to go, I tried my best. I was really relieved to finish, to have this experience be done with. And so after crossing the finish line, so the first thing that I saw was getting my medal. That was amazing. The next thing was to get your goodie bag, which had a New York Macintosh apple, had a couple of recovery drinks from Gatorade, a few honey stingers in there that were there to help you recover, and then some extra brochures that would be in there to help you kind of move it along. Every single participant this year had the poncho. And so I was able to enjoy getting that poncho on there. Thinking of a poncho, I'm thinking of something very light material, almost like a raincoat. But it was definitely not. It's very heavy duty material. It is something that I would definitely be wanting to use for pretty much the rest of my life on any cold day. And the only thing it just needs would be some sleeves. But other than that, it was great. And so once you kind of just get your poncho and slowly penguin your way out of Central Park and get yourself through the city of Manhattan and get yourself on your way. So yeah, I'm really curious on what you think. What did you enjoy the most? And if you weren't a runner, instead you were a spectator, either in New York City or a spectator online or through TV or any other sort of medium, then let me know, what did you enjoy as a viewer? What did you like the best? What coverage did you feel as though you wanted to hear more from, or what do you feel like you learned new from the experience? So just let me know in the comments. I really want to hear what you have to say, and I'll enjoy responding to each and every single one of you. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video and this breakdown of my personal experiences. And so let me know. Again, like and subscribe to the channel so that way more content can be created for the community. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you on the next one.
Everyone is your best friend. You need the energy, right?
You love the on-course embrace.
Absolutely.
When we come back,